our COBT friends, it's Maynard, Mike, and Jeff here with a really extraordinary guest and we're excited for an extraordinary hour. We've got Mayor Sylvester Turner. He's Houston's 62nd mayor. He's in his second term. As you know, being the mayor of Houston means you know a lot about energy. This mayor has been super engaged with energy transition, all the things that have been coming the world's way. And to make it even more interesting, he's recently been in Africa. He was in Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, talking with those countries and communities about what's happening there, what Houston can do, what the energy communities can do, and just what's on the mind of all those important places. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for coming to visit with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, we're thrilled. Mike, what would you tell the mayor? Let's get the mayor an energy market update.
Well, you know,
I mean, he's the mayor of the capital of the energy world.
Well, you know, I mean, we usually we shoot after the close. Today, we're right at the opening, and so the only real economic data that's come out today is the JOLTS job openings, and you know, it's been really, really strong, and it came in really below estimates by 500,000 or 600,000 below estimates. So bond yields are plunging, stock market is up. So at least we have that, you know, kind of our back today. So something to watch. I'd say, you know, sort of 3 or 4 areas that we want to talk about is we want to talk about economics. We want to talk about, you know, what's going on with commodities, what's going on with, you know, energy equities, and really sort of Exxon put out a 2050 outlook yesterday. We want to kind of touch that and really kind of weaves into what we're going to talk to the mayor about. From a market standpoint, you know, economic standpoint, well, we saw Chairman Powell came out last week. He had hosted that meeting up in Jackson Hole, and what he pretty much said is they're going to be vigilant with rates. They're going to look at the data, and you know, obviously today with the data coming up a little bit weaker, that might influence how they're thinking about their September FOMC meeting. So that's one. The second thing is you're seeing this UAW potential strike. September 14th is when the deadline comes. All 3 you know, major car companies, you know, Ford, GM, Stellantis, which is a Chrysler, they could strike. That's upwards of 150,000 people. They're looking for wage increases of like 45%. They want their pensions back. They want, you know, shorter work weeks. I mean, it's a lot. And you saw what happened. UPS gave in. You had American Air, Delta. They've all given generous, you know, wage increases. And so I think that the UAW is going to, you know, extract something. It's going to mean that auto prices are probably going higher. They're competing with Tesla, so that's going to be an interesting situation. September 14th is a deadline on that. The thing that we're looking for on the commodity side is obviously, you know, Hurricane Idalia is going to hit Florida. What is that going to do to gasoline demand? What's that going to do to power demands there? Obviously, we deal with that every year here in Houston as well. And so that's something that we're focused on. You know, we also saw on Friday the Garyville refinery went out temporarily. That's impacting gasoline. And gasoline inventories are substantially below where they need to be at this point of the seasonally. So we're watching that. I'd say, you know, next week we're going to be going to the Barclays conference. It's the first energy conference post Q2 earnings. So we're going to be looking to see what E&Ps are saying in regards to budgets. Probably not going to be saying much, but there's just going to be this, you know, push and pull between E&Ps and oil service companies. The last thing we really wanted to talk about is Exxon put out this 2050 outlook. And I thought it was really interesting. I'll give you some stats. I'll read them. Their outlook is there's going to be 2 billion more people by 2050. There's going to be a 25% reduction in emissions despite a 100% increase in global growth. Think about that. We're going to double global growth and we're going to basically reduce emissions. That has never happened. That's a fantastic thing. Unfortunately, they're also saying emissions will be 2 times higher than the Paris Accord by 2050. The other thing they're saying is soaring growth of developing countries. GDP per capita will double by 2050. We'll need 15% more energy in 2050 to support population growth and basically standard of living. And oil and natural gas in 2050 will be 54% of the energy mix. But that's still about 85 million barrels a day. So it's down, but it's still substantial. The thing I want to leave you, and we want to talk to, you know, I'm going to ask the mayor about this, is they also did this study, and it was 2001 to 2021. It looked at both China and Africa on a per capita GDP and the consumption of energy. Back then, China's per capita GDP was $2,000. And our energy consumption was 36 MMBTU. Today, it's 11,000, so it's 5 times higher. and their energy consumption is about 100 million MMBTU. Africa, back in 2001, was exactly the same. They were around $2,000 per capita GDP. It's only gone up $500, $2,500, and their energy use back then was 27 MMBTU. It's exactly the same. So that's a compare and contrast of what has happened in two different countries. I think Africa is sort of been 20 years of just a lost 20 years. I think the next 20 or 30 years we should strive to have them do exactly like China did, and that's what we plan to ask the mayor about. So we'll go ahead and end it there.
Yeah, really interesting, Mike. Jeff, anything you throw in before we jump in with the mayor?
No, I think I'm excited to dive in with the mayor. I mean, Africa is so important from a population. I mean, think about what's going to drive global GDP growth. It's population growth and productivity. And Africa is home to where we can see significant advancement in both. And so I'm just ready to dive in.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Mayor, it really is a lot of fun. Thank you for your service to the city.
Thank you.
And it's just great to spend time with you. I've had the pleasure of hearing you on a couple of occasions where you talk about the city and Houston. It's how important it is to energy. I think you give that speech better than any of us could. Tell us about this trip and what gave rise to it, and just give us a little of the background.
6 years ago, we started what we call Africa Day in the city of Houston. It was started by my Mayor's Office of Trade and International Affairs. We have a large African population in the city of Houston, particularly Nigerians. And we thought it was important to kind of put a focus on those living in our city, in the region. So that was 6 years ago. It started right at City Hall, in the legacy room at City Hall. 6 years later, it has grown so big that we have moved it to the George R. Brown Convention Center. And it has attracted as many as 15 African ambassadors at one time. And then after that, we've been talking with a number of individuals. So we started the Houston Africa Energy Summit. And that was in September of last year. Very well attended. People came from all over. So that was a positive. And then in a number of conversations that we were having with African leaders, with the ambassadors and others, they kept saying, we keep coming to the United States, but we don't see nearly that many people coming to us. And the foreign minister and the mayor of Abobo in Cote d'Ivoire, she came and visited with me in May of this year. Brought a delegation, visited with people at the Great Houston Partnership and others, seeking greater trade and investment opportunities. And in that meeting, I told her, I look forward to coming to Cote d'Ivoire. And then the year before, the president of Ghana came, sat down and talked, and said the same thing. I look forward to seeing you in Ghana. So we simply decided that if we were going to strengthen and enhance our relationship with Africa, that it was important for us to add Africa to our list and to go and visit them. And so we decided to go to West Africa, 3 countries, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. And I will tell you, we were very well received. But that was the emphasis behind it. That's what caused the trip to occur.
Is that, people, we always talk about it, Houston's such a diverse city. It has so many people from so many different groups. African immigrants, does Houston have maybe the most of any city in the U.S.?
We have, when it comes to the Nigerian population, we have the largest number of Nigerians in the city of Houston than any other place in the United States. And that's including New York, or Chicago, any other city. And
do you know roughly how many that is? It's a big number.
It's just a large number. I don't have the exact number, but it is large and growing. Now, ironically, the consular office is in Atlanta. Okay. And they have a couple of other offices, for example, along the East Coast. But in terms of having the largest population, that's right here. With respect to the other Africans from other countries, we have one of the largest populations. Collectively, Yeah, Houston is at the top, if not at the very, very top.
Really interesting. And so the trip, how did you, I mean, it sounds great, right? Just to go and see it. How do you think about, okay, where are we, you chose the countries, but then how do you get organized? Who's going with you? Okay, what are we going to do when we're there? It's kind of daunting to think about organizing something like that.
We treated it like we have treated all of our trade and investment missions. In the 8 years that I've been mayor, in almost every single year, with the exception of 2020, COVID, we have gone to about 3 or 4 countries every single year. And whether it was China, whether it was India, I mean, we've been there. Whether it's on the European continent, we have gone there. And so we viewed this one as the same. We reached out to people in the business community. We reached out to people in the medical community to come. The Mayor's Office of Trade and International Affairs took the lead, like they have done for all of the others. We ended up putting together a 30-person delegation. We knew for Nigeria, for example, having a direct flight was important. So, we took people from the airport. In Cote d'Ivoire, we knew that healthcare was important. That's one of the elements. So we took people from the medical center. And also workforce opportunities were important. So people took people from some like our innovation sector. Okay. And in Ghana, tourism was huge. So we took people from that sector. Energy, critically important. So Chevron and Halliburton had representatives on the trip with us. So it was a 30-person delegation covering several different business interests.
And all of you went to all 3 countries?
All of us started in Nigeria, then to Cote d'Ivoire, and then to Ghana.
I think we've got some quick stats we pulled just so people can have a feel for it. We'll pull them up here. First is the snapshot of the 3 countries. And then we've got a little bit of information on each country. So Nigeria, you look at it, huge population, 218 million people. The GDP for Nigeria and for Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, Mike, to your comments earlier, it's in that $2,000 range. The other thing that jumps out, there's a lot here, but the energy consumption. I think Nigeria is the lowest in terms of access to electricity at just over 50%. And if you flip to the next country, Ghana, smaller, 34 million people, has much higher power.
Right.
According to this, almost 85% of the people have access to power. But again, the same GDP type numbers. And then as you finish with Cote d'Ivoire, you see it's a little less, but again, pretty good. And then the population is not quite 30 million. So these are fascinating places. Nigeria is one, I think, for energy people. Historically, it's been such a big producer.
Oil and gas.
And very well known. Ghana, more recently, there were a lot of discoveries, and now Cote d'Ivoire has been in the news as well. How did the energy meetings, what type of, when you thought about the information you were looking for or the experience you wanted to have around energy, how did you plan like that part of your discussion?
Based on the Houston African Energy Summit, when you start talking about climate change, energy transition, for Africa, it's a bit different. They need their energy. They need oil and gas to develop their economies. They need the dollars in order to build. There's a great deal of energy poverty on the African continent, specifically, for example, like in Nigeria. So they need their oil and gas to be produced and to work for them and for their economy. So when you start talking about energy transition to them, it's somewhat of a bit different conversation. It's one thing to be developed and then to move away. It's another thing when you're seeking to meet the needs, the day-to-day needs of your people and your economy, and you need jobs and opportunities and infrastructure. So for Nigeria, the focus on a lot was on how do we produce and utilize it to grow, to get to the point that we can really have a more in-depth conversation on energy transition. So it was different. And I would venture to say in all of the countries, that thought was pretty much the same. Okay.
It's an economic development focused conversation.
Well, it's about survival.
Yeah.
Okay. When we talk about population growth, I mean, you're looking at about 2 billion people on the African continent, and you're looking at a young population. These are not countries with a small population. They're growing. It's young. They're looking for opportunities for the people, workforce opportunities, all of those things. They're looking for infrastructure, drainage, sewage, the things that in many cases that we may take for granted. They're trying to get there.
Well, you mentioned they're young, and I should have cited this, but in those 3 countries, the median age is 18, 20, and 21 years old. So
which
young.
also speaks to the opportunities that exist in those countries. Okay. And then internationally as we move forward, and I would tell you, and they are wanting Americans, the United States, and their companies and businesses to be in Africa.
Do you notice, I guess, 2 questions we have as, watchers of this over, a long time, guys, 30 years. Did the countries look back on their experiences with energy companies previously and think, okay, we've learned a thing or two about how to work with these guys, and so that would be one question. And then the other one is, of course, the Chinese are all over the continent, and I'm sure that creates. I'm happy for them that the Chinese are there investing, but we all know it creates other issues. So
we had a lot of conversation about the Chinese being in Africa. They brought it up. They were not hesitant to bring it up. But what they said to me was that, Mayor, we would like to do more business with the United States. But oftentimes we're forced to do business with people who show up. And China is showing up. Okay? Now, what would you have us to do? Would you have us to say no to China and other countries who are showing up as we wait on the United States and their companies to come? Or do we do business with those who show up and are at least present? And I think in large part, that's why we were greeted so very warmly, because it wasn't just me coming, by myself. It was a large delegation with their various interests. So they want to see Americans and American businesses and companies on the African continent doing business. Now, as I said to them, businesses like certainty.
Yeah.
The regulatory environment is very, very important. But what they have said, and what they've said repeatedly, is that we understand all of that. But it's also, when you show up, we can have these conversations. If you're knocking on the door, we can have these conversations.
Right.
But if you knock on the door, but if you're not there, you can't. Or if you have come and left, then that makes it even difficult, because they have needs they need to address every single day.
So one thing that's come up with some previous guests around developing countries in Africa in particular is that the World Bank is not facilitating the investment in oil and gas related infrastructure, or nuclear for that matter. Was there any conversation about the World Bank or these intermediaries and the role they play? And
that I had conversations with respect to them as well, about that as well. They want greater presence. Look, they need investments.
Yeah.
They need partners. Okay. They want the opportunity to sit down and say, okay, how can we make this a win-win? Okay. To give you an example, in Cote d'Ivoire, they could not be more welcoming. And they have a lot of mineral resources. In fact, I think almost 40% of the mineral resources are right there on the African continent. So it's there. The mineral resources are there. But what they're saying is that let's establish win-win relationships. Let's not take a situation where the minerals are being taken and then everything is being processed outside of Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, when they have a young potential workforce that need the job opportunities. So what they emphasize to me and to others is that we're looking for relationships that can work both ways and be a bit win-win. And quite frankly, I've come back and to encourage American businesses and companies to look to Africa. And let us not wait too late, okay? Because China is present, but China is not their preferred partner of choice.
You're, of course, there, post all the problems in the Ukraine and kind of the energy problems in Europe. And I guess one impression you have is that we have is that in countries that are mineral rich, resource rich, post the Ukrainian war, everyone realizes their supply chains are issues and everybody's worried about their own energy costs and such. You just get this feeling that countries from all over, but particularly Europe, are visiting Africa, trying to cut deals, trying to say, how do we get your stuff? Does it feel that way when you listen to them? Or
yes, but they're very, how can I put it? They're not eager to jump into those relationships. The past experiences are still very present in their heads today.
I see.
And so the whole colonialism and all of that still very much present. They don't want to go back to that. They don't want to feel as though they are being taken advantage of. And people are recognizing that they're mineral rich, there are mineral resources there. But so come and take, but their status remains the same. Okay. Now, to the extent, people are coming in, businesses are coming in, and building out that value-added manufacturing chain or supply chain where it's a win-win, then I think they're very open and receptive to that. But there's a lot of distrust, okay, that exists, and I think that's why it's important to show up and to go to Africa. That I think is the first step, is to show up. And so, for example, when we showed up and they're seeking to build a hospital in Cote, and the Texas Medical Center is working with them to build that hospital. That's a huge deal. Okay, when we took people from the innovation sector that's helping them to establish their innovation hub, their relationship is already established, that's a huge deal. And so when it came time, for example, to the Prime Minister showing up, I'm not the head of state. I'm the mayor of the fourth largest city. But when the Prime Minister shows up and takes 2 hours of his time, and then when the Vice President changes his schedule and shows up, and then when the governor shows up, okay, and when the mayor, the foreign minister, and also the mayor of Abobo shows up, that's a big deal. For Nigeria, the response was overwhelming. Once we got there, the meeting started to click, and members of the diaspora and the head of the diaspora shows up. That's a huge deal. So there's a huge opportunity to engage and do business with Africa. They are wanting it, even on the energy sector, okay? Because for them, energy poverty is real.
Probably
so
especially.
Especially on the energy sector. Huge opportunities. And I think we just have to kind of work through all of the regulatory concerns and that I think that companies look for. But I would strongly encourage American companies and American interests to look to the African continent.
You're really kind of painting a picture of China is showing up, and there's some reluctance, but they do business with China. The Europeans have all this baggage when they show up, and the U.S., seems to have a bit of a competitive advantage. We have a lot of Africans here in the U.S. There's a lot of cultural ties. There's an angle.
There's no question. For Cote d'Ivoire, a strong French influence, strong, okay? But they're also looking to the United States. Nigeria, strong influence, just for the city of Houston. And now they're looking at opening up a consular office, a lot of conversation about direct flight, and then encouraging a greater relationship in the energy sector. Huge opportunities. Ghana, same thing. Want to see energy presence, energy companies presence. The meetings with Chevron and Halliburton were very, very helpful, but they're looking for others as well. I just think when you're looking at a continent with 2 billion people and a very young population, and 40% of the minerals in the world are located on this continent, I think we make a huge mistake by waiting. I think you do business with those who show up and knock on the door.
You probably already answered my question, but I'll ask it probably in a different way. We quoted the 2,500 per capita GDP hasn't changed in 20 years. So it's not like Africa has just been thrust upon the scene in the last 2 years and everyone knows what's going on demographically. Is there another issue we just don't understand here? Because it's not a U.S. issue. It's also like if you listen to the COP conferences, they're sitting there going, we need to put $100 billion a year in undeveloped countries, but the money's never end up showing up.
Right.
Is there something about Africa? Is it just the political issue? Is it the regulatory issue that you sit there and go, okay, 20 years from now, if these 2 or 3 things happen, guess what? They're not going to be at 2,500 per capita. They're going to be at 11,000 like China. What are those 2 or 3 things that have to happen? I know we have to show up, but how do we show up, and what are the things that they roll out to get us to show up?
Let me tell you, in my 8 years in working on these trade and investment missions, we've not had a difficult time getting people to, when we went to China, a lot of interest. Yep. When we went to India, a lot of interest. Europe, a lot of interest. Going down to Latin America, a lot of, we did not have a hard time getting businesses and others to join us. Yeah. In fact, sometimes we said we just got too many, we had to cut it off. But I would tell you on this trade investment mission, we had a hard time. It just seemed as though the business community was, I don't know if it was the image that people have of the African continent or the perception. But it was not easy to get the same sort of support that we've gotten on every other trade and investment mission. Right. And on this particular trip, for example, the Mayor's Office of Trade and International Affairs really had to step out and carry the ball. And then we had to make the individual calls to individual businesses and companies to come. It was the hardest trade and investment mission to put together. And yet, the African continent holds the greatest promise for and opportunities for the United States and the future. You can't write it off, you can't ignore it, and quite frankly, if we come too late, then we all will lose out. And it's almost like when people are dealing with energy poverty and infrastructure issues and all of these others, and they see their young population needing jobs, and they're looking for partners. And so here comes China, and China is providing the rope. They don't necessarily want the rope, but they don't see another one either. So what would you have them to do? You grab the rope that currently exists, even though it's not yet a relationship that you really want to embrace.
Maybe just follow on to that question. You've seen it firsthand. You went there. You've dealt with them. How does that message get from Houston to DC?
Being on this podcast, talking to you all. But let me tell you something else. The U.S. ambassadors over there asked to join us in going on to the various meetings. There were meetings, for example, that they could not get to, but when we came, the doors opened. And so they asked to join me in those meetings. And so when you have the prime ministers and the vice presidents and others who are now sitting down, they have access. When we got ready to leave a couple of the countries, what the ambassador said to me, Mayor, this has been amazing. The doors open for you like they had not opened for us in the past. We're going to change our strategy. Right. It might be a better strategy now to work through the mayors. Because one thing I want to tell you about mayors, whether you're the mayor of Houston or the mayor of Abobo in Cote d'Ivoire, we do the same thing. We're in the people's business. We have to make things happen. And those doors open. Now, mind you, I'm also the board chair of the Global Resilient Cities Network. And I've been the board chair for the last 3 years. So those relationships helped as well. But, we can make a difference. I'm certainly saying to the administration, to our energy companies that have been so very instrumental in the development of the city of Houston, let's not come to the party here too late. Let's recognize the potential of the African continent and all that it hopes to bring. And let's not leave it to other countries like China or Russia to take advantage when they want the relationship with the United States.
I'm curious, each of those three countries is in a different part of their journey in regards to development, but you go over with a diverse delegation. And so it's interesting to me, if you go over with an energy-only delegation, you might get different response, and it's harder to gauge, receptivity, perception, relationship between the U.S. energy companies and those African countries. How would you describe, both the receptivity and the relationship in relative to, say, the medical delegation that came over? How was our energy business received over there?
Well, what worked well is that we took a delegation that was diverse in terms of the business interests. So people from the energy sector, they saw that. We took people from the life sciences, healthcare sector, and they're certainly in need, and they saw that. In Ghana, for example, before we left, one of the leading business persons is looking at establishing a major hospital in Ghana. So people from the medical, from our group, that was beneficial. When you're taking people from the workforce development innovation sector, that was very helpful. Which means is that we looked at it from a very much more of a holistic situation. So they saw us not in a sense coming to say, okay, let's take advantage of the energy that exists, that we need for our internal operation, okay? But how can we build win-win relationships that we can work on the energy sector, fine, your healthcare sector, building out the value-added manufacturing sector, innovation sector, all of those things were critically important. And I think that helped to build and strengthen how we were received in all three, because all three are different. As you said, Nigeria, oil and gas, primary interest. So we met with the Minister of Energy, the interim, because the president is still in the process of naming that. But that was well received. Cote d'Ivoire, economy, workforce development, life sciences, important. For Ghana, oil and gas, energy, tourism, all of those are important. And quite frankly, and Houston happens to be one of, if not the major urban trade partners with Africa as a whole. Because with Nigeria, I think we're about 1.6 billion. With Cote d'Ivoire, we're right around, I don't want to say 200 million. And with Ghana, we're close to 300 as of 2022. But there's a lot of room for growth and development.
Do you notice, now that you're back and reflecting on the trip and thinking about those conversations, do you notice a handful of things that could be done sort of administratively or legally or sort of in terms of the bureaucracy that would make it easier for U.S. companies to invest? Anything around, there's always something that's getting in the way, and what could we do to streamline it, make it easier?
I think number one, it's always important to get to know the person across the table.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships. Look, what I've learned in my 35 years in this business, relationships are everything.
Yeah.
When we started dealing with energy transition in the city of Houston, look, we're the energy capital of the world.
Yeah.
I was asked to lead the U.S. climate mayors. One of the first things I did was call some of the energy CEOs and say, okay, what do you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
And they were the ones who encouraged me to move forward, to show how Houston, in its own unique way, is dealing with energy transition.
Yeah.
But it's about the relationships. And so you have Shell, for example, that underwrote our Resilient Houston plan. Centerpoint and BP supported our climate action plan. And even with what we're doing in energy transition, it's not working against, it's working with to move the city forward to keeping us in at the top of the list. So relationships. And I think if you build the relationship, the business will follow.
That makes total sense. One thing you mentioned, you've done a lot of work with a lot of other mayors during your term, so you get to see mayoral sentiment, right, up close and personal. What do you notice about other mayors right now and how they're thinking about, there's been such an evolution in this energy discussion around what you just said, which is, wait a minute, we're not switching horses, we're adding a horse. Do you notice other mayors kind of catching on to, some of the things that we think here in Houston?
Yeah, we don't
all think the same thing, but what I'm saying.
When I became chair of the U.S. Climate Mayors, I'll never forget, I wanted to have a forum with several of our CEOs of energy companies to talk about how can we achieve our goals and objectives, but from a technology perspective. There were a few mayors who said, Sylvester, hold up now. I mean, with the energy companies, with those individuals, don't know about that. But what I've said is that we need everybody at the table. And you don't make advances by shutting people out or not listening.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also said is, look, I'm the mayor of the energy capital of the world. The city of Houston was built by oil and gas. We wouldn't have the medical center without, or the Johnson Space Center, or the largest port, okay? But since 1901, when we discovered oil and gas, we have evolved. We no longer just talk about oil and gas. We talk about being the energy capital of the world. And now we are talking about leading in energy transition. And many of these same companies are making huge investments in the whole energy transition sector. Greentown Labs in the city of Houston that expanded from the East Coast. The initial focus was to establish 50 2.0 clean tech, climate tech companies. Now they're way ahead of schedule, really outpacing what they did in the Boston area. Well, that's a tremendous plus. Whether you're talking about CCUS, we'll see how that works, but we're moving forward. Hydrogen, moving forward. The Biden-Harris administration is making huge investments in hydrogen. Well, we want to be that hub in this area. So, if we want to achieve the objectives, you listen to the report that you gave from Exxon, more people, 25% emissions, but at the same time, more energy consumption. Right. It's going to take all of us working collaboratively if we are going to reverse climate change. And quite frankly, my view is if it can be done in the city of Houston, it can be done anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so in our city, we're not demonizing the energy sector, What we're saying is that how can we work collaboratively to lead the way to reduce climate change and the warming of this planet, but do it in such a way that we don't create winners and losers. And I think we can do that.
You know, your philosophy there about having everybody at the table so that you can say, okay, where are we? Let me get all the perspectives. What are we trying to do? That type of philosophy. I feel like that's, in essence, what we're trying to do here. We're trying to talk to every flavor of energy, every concern, be it economic or security or environmental, and say, okay, remember, energy is good. How do we get more of it and solve for the other things?
Well, you know, I learned that when I first came in, we had a huge pension problem in the city of Houston. It hadn't been addressed in some 20-some years. What I decided to do was bring all of the labor leaders to the table at one time and say, okay, do we agree we have a problem? How can we fix it? And then to work with the business sector as well and the political sector. We're working collaboratively. In the end, we were able to come to a solution that has worked. So instead of having $8.2 billion unfunded liability when we first started 8 years ago, now the unfunded liability is less than $2.2 billion and moving in the right direction. That would not have happened without having everybody at the table, working collaboratively, and then let me put at the front, and then about having positive relationships.
Yes.
Because if you don't have the relationship, and if it's very, very difficult to get anything done.
So on this point and thinking about energy and having everyone at the table, it sort of seems like one of the problems in the energy, environment, climate discussion is the developing world isn't at the table.
Yeah.
That feels like one of the biggest problems, and we're solving for a lot of developed world, concerns, but we're not really. Can we change that, or do you think that's
Well, I think
because we don't have economic development conferences as much as we used to. Like we used to,
Well, I think it can happen. Not only do I think it can happen, it must happen.
Mm-hmm.
Look, Hurricane Harvey for the city of Houston in 2017 was a game changer.
Yeah, 6 years ago, right?
CEO called me before the hurricane hit and was saying, Mayor, we're taking some things to protect our assets and our people. But it was devastating. After 2017, we recognized that we needed to do some things differently, okay? In everybody's best interest, okay? But everybody needed to be at the table and feel as though they're having some input on this quote unquote new paradigm that we're trying to create. You can't force a new paradigm on people if they haven't had input in the conversation. Yeah. You can't force a fit. My dad used to always say that you can't force a fit. Mm-hmm. You're trying to put this circle in this triangle. It's just not going to work. So that's doing it the hard way.
Yeah.
I think you have to recognize there are certain things we all have in common. And that is we want to address what's happening that's causing all these extreme weather events and all of that. But let's do it in such a way that it doesn't demonize or put others just totally out of business. Mm-hmm. And I think you can have, and what I've said at the Global Resilient Network, you can have climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and you can have resilience, and you can have equity, and you can do it without creating winners and losers. But what that means is that when you're trying to put together your framework, mm-hmm. everyone has to participate in that conversation. Mm-hmm. Okay.
That community, that was so well said. Do you think people are appreciating what's happening to just the cost of energy? And because I think mayors, that community, they have, every mayor has people in their city that are low income. And so every mayor is very in touch with what cost spikes due to low income people.
Right.
Do you feel like that's just something we're noticing because we're making all these power decisions, power prices are going up, and it really hurts those individuals. Do you think that the mayoral community is tuning in to some of those issues?
Let me tell you, if there's any community that's tuned into those issues, that's the mayoral community. Community. We are the boots on the ground.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
You're the sheriffs of all these places.
When we go to the grocery store, it turns into a town hall meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't.
You might be the only politicians that know what the cost of groceries are.
Yeah, you can't run away from it. And then at the same time, as we talk about Africa and energy poverty, in some of our neighborhoods in our cities, energy poverty exists.
Which is stunning.
Yeah. So you have to address that. Those issues are real. It's not just something on another continent. It exists in many of our cities, in our communities and neighborhoods. So we have to address that. And we also have to talk about, and I even tell people when we're discussing climate change, if you discuss it in academic terms, it doesn't resonate. You have to put it down. It's
another wildly complicated topic. You can't.
You have to discuss it in how does it impact the day-to-day lives of people who are working every day to take care of their families. They've got a lot of responsibilities. And so what does it mean to them? And then whatever direction we choose to take, we have to take into account that when we make decisions, somebody is going to be impacted. And so you do your best to try to minimize those impacts, and try to achieve the positive result. I'm very proud of what's taking place, for example, in the city of Houston. I'm very proud. It's the energy sector, for example, to give you an example. In the Sunnyside community, city of Houston, low income, primarily African American. There was a landfill that opened in the 1930s, closed in the 1970s under protest, left 240 contaminated acres, holding down their community for the last 50 plus years. Working with the energy sector, we're in the process of turning that into the largest urban solar farm in the United States, and it should become operational in 2024. Now, it will take 120 million pounds of emissions annually out of the air, okay? It will power enough homes, of 5,000 to 10,000 homes. It's more than a $70 million investment. Will create green jobs, you name it, and it's done in collaboration with the energy sector. That's a win-win. So people who have been living in that community, they get the benefit because their community now is being revived. On the energy side, energy transition, we're removing some emissions, okay, from the air. We're creating jobs. And it's being done in collaboration with the energy sector. The city of Houston, all 550 buildings are now 100% powered by renewables. But it's been done in collaboration with NRG. But 100% powered. The city of Houston, we purchased more renewables than any city in the United States of America. The energy capital of the world, okay? City of Houston, but done in collaboration with the energy sector.
I don't think anybody watching, I don't think anybody had that stat. It's an amazing stat. Mike?
Obviously, Houston's growing. It's fantastic. You're the ambassador for Houston. When you go overseas, and you've seen like the IRA is kicking in all these new projects, the industrial sector is moving here as well. Hate to end it on a negative tone, but I mean, what are some of the reasons why companies don't locate in Houston? Is it a permitting issue? Is it just what is it? Is it hey, Hurricane Alley? What is the one feedback that you hear and you say, okay, we saw that this thing is just really going to go crazy? Maybe we say, what do they see really positive here? And maybe maybe one negative, what they see that kind of holds them away.
Well, I tell you what I think what they see that's very positive here is that we don't have a very onerous regulatory environment.
I was going to say permitting is a big issue nationally.
Yeah. But it's not nearly as big here as it is in other areas. And I think that's a big plus. Yeah. And then they also see a community that's just very innovative, They see a very diverse population. But if you stop there, you miss. I think they see the most diverse city, but a very inclusive city. And I think what makes us attractive, I tell you, just like doing social civil unrest, where every other major city in the United States had to impose a curfew. City of Houston never did.
That's right.
Okay, so it's an environment where it's highly diverse on so many different levels. I'm not just talking ethnicity, but on so many different levels, but very inclusive all at the same time. So we're very creative, we're very innovative, we're moving forward on that front. And I think what they like is that they can come to the city of Houston. There are 2 international airports within the city's geographical boundaries, so they can get in and out. There are direct flights almost anywhere they want to go. Okay, I think that's a plus. You have the largest medical center here, and you have the #1 port in the United States in terms of foreign tonnage. So those are things, I think, things that they like. In terms of things that they might cause them some hesitancy, you know, we're on the Gulf Coast, so storms come, you know. But where there may have been a leading factor, right now there's storms and fires and events all over. So, you know, you just have to take that with a grain of salt.
It's part of business.
It's a part of business. But I think what they like, for example, is a friendly regulatory environment. You know, it's not a lot of uncertainty, and you have a very business climate in the city of Houston. I think those are things that are attractive, and I think that's why you have more companies that are coming to the area.
It's been a fun, hour where we spent talking about policy and political issues, and none of the 4 of us have mentioned the political party, and it's like crazy encouraging to me. So, because what you've talked about is.
Are you going to do that now, Jeff?
No, I'm not. No, but what you've talked about has been, it's inclusive, it's goal oriented, it's measurement oriented. What can the U.S. I mean, is it a function of because you're mayor and you're local that we're just forced to be accountable for boots on the ground? But what lessons can we learn from how you have engaged with the energy community, how you've engaged with the population, the citizens of Houston, just to accomplish what you laid out here over the last hour?
Well, I think you have to recognize no one has all the answers. I mean, I don't want to come to the table assuming that my position is the perfect position. We all learn from one another. And I think you don't attach evil motives to folk. I don't get into that. That's, I think what it is important to get to know who you're sitting across from. So the relationships are important. Collaboration is important. You don't do very much successfully just by yourself. And I think you have to recognize that every time you take a step, you can step forward, but you can also be stepping on somebody. And if you're stepping on someone, they're going to say, ouch. Okay? So you really have to be very methodical in your approach. And you also have to recognize there are many ways to get to where you want to go. I may choose to take this direction. Someone else may choose to take this direction. But if the direction in which we're taking lead us to where we want to go, then it's okay. Okay, so you have to define where you want to go, and how we get there may take different routes. But if we are getting to where we are intended to get to, then what's wrong with that?
That's great.
Okay.
Can I ask you one last question?
Sure.
So you're in the end of your second term.
Yeah.
This work on Africa in particular is it's so impressive to us. You've done a lot of great things, but this is really special. Do you see yourself doing more, building this bridge to Africa in the coming years? Because you're perfectly position to do it. And as you think about energy in the world and all these debates we're having, if we get Africa right, like if you just knew that we somehow got Africa right as a global community, then that would mean we got a lot of other things right too.
Yeah.
So any hint of what you'll do next?
Look, I'm going to continue to stay engaged. I don't think what we do or the passion in which we're doing it is defined by a particular position.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, then pretty much you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I knew when I came up, the maximum I could serve as mayor was 8 years. But it doesn't mean it's the impact that you can have is or just tied to a title or that particular position. So I would like to continue. I think there's a huge, huge opportunity by really engaging the African continent and building those relationships and those collaborations. I think it's huge. I think it's important, not just for me, but for my children, my grandchildren, and others beyond. I think it's important for the United States, okay? And I just think we'll make a serious mistake if we show up too late and in many ways inadvertently force people or countries to do business with people that they really don't want to do business with. Why make it easy for China? And you make it easy for China just by the United States not being present. So why make it easy for them? Okay? And why help create a relationship that could be adverse to our interests? That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay?
As far as like one of the best parts of foreign policy is making friends.
Yeah.
More friends, that's a good thing.
More friends, stronger interests, better for you and for me.
Amen.
Okay. So this is one time that I hope that the United States and businesses will act in their self-interest and will not allow perceptions to keep us away from a major continent that potentially can have huge impact on all the rest of us. And when you're dealing with a continent with 2 billion people and a very young population, I think we need to bear in mind that who educates them, who prepares them for work opportunities, who can take and utilize them in our own businesses, energy sector, you name it, those are the long-term relationships that will benefit all of us, okay? Because in walking the streets of Nigeria and being there in Cote d'Ivoire and being there in Ghana, our presence makes a huge, huge difference. And then I'll just close by just saying this, and I'm a mayor, okay? I'm not the head of state. But in each one of those stops, number one, they were familiar with Houston. They knew it was a 30-person delegation. And they went out of their way in each country to make it easy for us to go from point A to point B. I think we need to really build on those relationships, and I think we make a mistake if we don't. And I came back and I've said, for example, to the mayor of New York, to LA and Chicago and others, you need to point your people and companies and businesses, you need to point them in that direction. There's a huge opportunity here. Let's take full advantage of it while the door is open.
Fantastic. Mr. Mayor, we really appreciate it. Thank you for everything you've done for Houston, and we're looking forward to staying in touch with you going forward.
Well, look, thank you all for what you all are doing through the pandemic and today. But thank you so very much for having me.
It's awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.